The camera. We are live.
What an unpleasant view of my
We
legs.
are live. And see people coming in. Are we live on Instagram?
We are now live.
We are live.
We're live on Instagram.
Cool.
Let's see. Let's give 1 minute for people to get in.
I don't want this to be able to see.
Alright, we got people in on the Instagram.
George Foster, what's up? Kamel, what's up? And Board Runner and Kamel the same person?
Oh yeah, it is.
Nice.
Alright, we'll give it a few, and why don't we just kick it off? It's 1 minute.
What's up, Meg?
Alright, so welcome back to another episode of Shoot the Chips with i2R CNC. Today we're going to talk a little differently. We're going to go over the topics on going over a process on a project that Pat made, and then also we're going to talk about lessons learned and mistakes that will happen. They're common when you're doing any type of custom work. The best thing that I would recommend when you're making mistakes and machining is to pre-plan and prevent them. But sometimes, if you're like me, you just want to get the job done and you kind of rush through it, and you risk making those errors anyways. So it's more about discipline and knowing that, okay, well, I don't want to waste all my material, I don't want to waste all my time, so I'm going to apply the hard lessons that I learned. But today we're going to share with you some of the projects that we made, how to fix them, what happens and what to look out for, so that you don't have to make those same mistakes when you're first starting out on your project. So Pat, let's start with your one sign here.
Sure. All right.
Hey, Pat.
How's it going, Internet? We got this, which is I believe they're called Marquee Signs. It's essentially just either a letter, a number, a symbol, and you pre-drill holes that can fit light bulbs and light strips. So this is actually for Fu, our CEO. He has a daughter who's turning 1 in, do you know the birthday? It's in a couple weeks, right?
June,
Yeah.
Next week.
Yeah, like mid-June. So we put this together for her birthday, which it's always great to be making something that you know is going to go to good use. So this was a cool project. I haven't done really an assembly cut like this before, at least at this scale. I've done things like what we have here, just boxes. Assembly cuts are pretty much anything that requires assembly after taking it off the machine. So it's not like a 3D relief or an engraving where it's kind of one and done. So working on this scale was interesting because I knew I had to make the number 1 just profile pass with some holes, measured those out. That was fairly easy. And then after that, it was mainly just the side panels, because originally I was thinking maybe I could just pocket out a thicker piece of material and then have the sides offset inward so that you had a natural border, but you wouldn't really get a whole lot of depth unless you were working with a huge piece of material, which probably couldn't even clear our z-axis. So then it came to assembly. That was pretty much just a matter of getting the one, measuring all the sides, calculating the thickness of the panels themselves to account for that on parts like the corner, where, I don't know, this thing's too bulky to try and maneuver and talk about. But so for instance, these are 0.4 inch thick pieces of ply. So when you're doing this side panel, you have to account for the length of the one itself, but then also the width of the panel that it's connecting with. So whether the top part's going to overhang or if it's going to inset by the 0.4 inches. Anyway, that was kind of fun. It was just a matter of problem solving, which if you're into woodworking or anything like that, is sometimes the most fun part of it. But I was kind of kicking myself afterwards because there were a couple things that I'd wish that I had done differently with this, mainly to help make the assembly easier. So how it's assembled now is it's just wood glue, which required some creative clamping and a lot of time because certain parts had to go on together because they had to align and you had to make sure it was 90 degrees because of the overlaps. So it took probably about 2 whole days of waiting for glue to dry and clamping up the next section, which probably could have been avoided. One of 2 ways. If I was going to do the gluing again, I would try and do kind of these inset sections that this box has where you can see one side accounts for space for the pattern of the other side to interlock with it. I don't know if YouTube and all of them can see it, but that would have made it a lot easier to just set everything up, make sure it's aligned, and then I wouldn't have to worry about kind of teetering with all these sliding faces. That was kind of annoying. Or if I wanted to do a mechanical connection with screws or anything like that, I would actually have just pre-drilled the holes in the side panels themselves on the CNC so that I knew they'd be aligned. Wouldn't have to worry about any misalignment trying to line it up myself or hold it with my hand or, again, clamp it, keep it in place. But what I can say I was happy that I did, which I recommend everybody do with multi-part cuts, is to number your pieces somewhere on the material. So for this one, you actually can't see them because I went back in with wood putty. Maybe if Sunny gets in there.
6 right there.
Yeah.
Instagram guys, you get to see it.
Yeah, sorry to everyone else. But definitely number your pieces. It makes assembly way easier, and it's just a nice perk of the CNC that it will do it automatically as part of the carving. I did that with this bigger project behind us, which was a total of 20 or so, maybe it was only 18 pieces, but it just made lining it up a lot easier. And we have some questions, which is great.
So, Board Runner, what's up, Board Runner? I hope you don't get 2 board running. He says, why not use the chamfer tool to allow for proper mitered corners?
So, yeah, that's another option. I definitely could have mitered or beveled my corners, or just any kind of sleeker interlocking system. You have a lot of options. That was honestly just kind of my blunder on design. I feel like I was just caught up with making sure the measurements were right. I kind of got in my head about like calculating the overhang, and it just got to a certain point where we needed to get this sign done. I had that calculation figured out. But yeah, something that I think is actually really cool that you can do specifically with 90-degree angles is to just use a 90-degree V-bit. And if you calculate out the cut depth correctly, you'll get a perfect 45-degree slope, and you can actually make mitered and beveled edges like that. Again, lessons learned, that's kind of the theme. Luckily, this one did turn out fine. I'm pleased enough with the finished result, and I hope that the 1-year-old
remembers
it ever.
All the work. That's the one thing about woodworking too, right? You put in all the time and effort, and people don't always really understand that. So we do. Another thing is we use mainly all our projects, and they're oriented around CNC because that's what we do mainly. So any type of traditional method you want to use, that's totally fine. For us, we try to automate everything so that we save as much time as possible so that we can free up our hands to do other things. Which machine did you use for that project?
This was cut on B24.
So that's the 2-foot by 4-foot machine.
Yep,
right?
And it was done in 2 different sections. I did the one profile first, and then I did the side panels on another 2x4 sheet. Luckily, thanks to nesting in Aspire, I was able to get all the side panels on the same sheet. So it was really easy. It was just 2 cuts. If I was working on the exec, though, it could have just been one 4x4 sheet. And I'm sure you could have even saved more space by nesting the one with the side panels. Nesting's great. If you don't know about nesting, I highly recommend looking into it. It saves you a lot of space and honestly a lot of time too. But again, nesting is especially a time you would want to use labeling on your pieces, because when it nests, it reorganizes itself, and you can very easily get kind of turned around and forget which panel goes where. And it's best to take precautions.
Yeah. So the nesting feature he's talking about is in VCarve. VCarve is one of the design software that we offer with our bundles with all the machines. They have many great different gadgets. So one is also even a box gadget. The one that Pat's mentioning is the feature for nesting. And if you're interested, we have plenty of other videos for VCarve, and you can even visit their website. Okay. And then the ultimate finish will be you've got the lights being installed today.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Okay.
Because I still have to do maybe a coat or two more of paint. I'd like to give a big shout out to white paint for not being opaque enough to just do it in one coat. Probably should have done a primer or any other kind of traditional painting thing that I'm not well versed on. But yeah, definitely paint it. Make sure everything's looking good and clean and nice, and then we will install the lights. Get this to that 1-year-old so she can have the best first birthday in the world.
Hopefully
You'll
she
light up
enjoys
her
it.
day for sure.
Yeah.
And then, so yeah, also the content, the video will be released soon, so you'll be able to see the finish on that.
And on top of that, if you are interested in making a marquee sign of any kind, if you have an event coming up, or if you just want one in your house for some reason, I'll judge you a little bit, but not that much. I'll be making a how-to video going through the design and the cutting aspects. So look out for that too. That's coming in, I don't know, soon.
Soon. TBD.
Yeah.
To be announced.
Mr. Mike, our favorite supporter here. He says, the back could have been used as a clamping jig, a shallow relief around the edge to allow it to fully overlap the back of the design.
Oh, that's genius. That would have been
He
great.
said, nesting will sometimes break grain alignment.
That's very true. So you can set, however, in the nesting rotation angle. So if you do a 0 rotation angle or a 180-degree rotation angle, you'll be able to keep your grain all going either laterally or perpendicular. But good point. Definitely something to consider, because that will possibly ruin your project if you have misaligned grain.
So on the scale of 1 to 10, if you're a beginner CNC, how would you rate that if someone's trying to start this as one of their beginner projects?
This one?
Yeah.
Like if you want to out the gate do
Scale
it?
of difficulty.
I would say if you're familiar with traditional woodworking at all, like if you come from a woodworking background, you could easily do this, because the main issue is really just making sure your measurements are good and sound. But other than that, the CNC process itself is only profile cuts. So as long as you have the measurements and you know how you want to assemble it, which I didn't really going into it, but keep in mind the assembly, and I'm sure woodworkers would be a lot better at that than I am. It's really simple, because it's just creating the shapes, and then I think each of them was a single tool path. It was just profile. I think I did a V-carve in the holes just to make them fit the kind of roundness of the bulbs a little bit better, but it's not necessary. And I actually had to do a little drilling because I miscalculated the diameter of the light bulbs.
PC Works,
Hey,
shout
what's
out
up?
in the house. So we were just talking about doing marquee signs, channel letters, numbers, lights. Maybe you could do that for your computers. Okay. Yeah, so that's another great thing that Mike was mentioning about the breaking the grain alignment. Those are all things to consider in the design phase, but then there are also things when you're actually cutting. But once you get past the actual cut, and let's say you have a very clean cut, the hardest part for me has always been finishing the project. So once I want to add color to it, the finishing doesn't always turn out great. And that's something that, Joel, he's great with the machines. He's great at operating them. He's great at all the behind the scenes technical things. But then also when it comes to the finishing and the art stuff, I think me and him are the same, where we're just bad. And we're gonna go ahead and jump into our section of finishing and coloring. So what we can talk about here is another project that we worked on recently, and this was for the Mets logo sign, and we did we try to do the epoxy on that. Usually Pat's the one that does most of the epoxy projects, but this one was Joel's that we did. And the initial idea was just to do a simple toolpath where we pocketed away the skyline, and then you also
The
pocketed
stitches
away the stitching
and the lettering
and the
on the
logo.
Mets.
So originally the entire stock material was coated blue with the intention of that raw material coloring to be blue. But what happened there? Like why did we have to adjust it so that we've got the original wood thing?
So I would say one thing we didn't take into consideration in doing it first is, especially when using epoxy, is if you're gonna do a pocket and then afterwards a V-carve toolpath, eventually when you put the epoxy, sometimes it will overflow. So you need to do a surfacing pass.
Yeah.
So since I had it around like 0.1, so I have like a slight limitation for the pocket. So when I was doing the surfacing pass, it took out all the blue, which was the spray paint that we had coated all over the raw material.
Yeah, it was a nice blue.
Yeah, and so especially with the surfacing pass, which is pretty hysterical, is some parts of it would still have the spray paint while other parts didn't, and it was because of the MDS spoil board. I forgot to surface it.
Yeah.
So that was another issue. So we kept on surfacing it, I would say at least 2 to 3 times. And you will notice over here that you could see kind of the stitches fading away, and especially with the bottom piece.
That used to be white.
Yeah, it used to be white, but it just faded.
Yeah. So things to consider there. And then
another portion as well, I would say with the drill. It seemed that it just fell overnight, but it pierced one of the sections, and so I could have used wood shavings, but since we were going with the idea of just using the blue paint, I still thought it was going to still be there, presence, and so I put paper as a filling on the section. You'll notice that it's still blue.
That'll be your good little take-home project. Yeah, so when it comes to the epoxy, it's very popular nowadays. People make a lot of furniture with epoxy, and we had a flag that we like to make with epoxy. I would say, what is your top 3 considerations? You can give one on doing the epoxy that you would recommend to people with CNC.
And it's just a design, or
like,
just as a recommendation?
Yeah, one thing to, like, a rule of thumb to always follow.
Okay, so the rule of thumb to always follow if you're going to do epoxy is know how deep you're going to go, especially for the pocket, since eventually you're going to do the surfacing pass.
Yeah.
So you don't want to limit yourself of doing just a little bit, because eventually you'll just shave off most of the material because you want to have the whole entire thing be flat. So you have to take that into consideration with epoxy.
Okay.
And another thing as well, I would say is when you're filling it with epoxy and the hardener, you want to know how much you're going to be wasting, because you don't want to fill in too much, because then eventually you'll have a bunch of epoxy still left over.
Yeah. Okay. Pat, you're the pro. How long did it take you to perfect your epoxy pouring skills?
It took I had so many nightmares of epoxy. Like, Fu used to always give me grief. he almost didn't. I think the time I finally got epoxy, was able to do it and kind of like understood the system, I'm pretty sure Fu said to me, like, you're not very good at epoxy. Like, I'll let you try this one, but if it doesn't go well, like, maybe just don't ever do epoxy again. So, one of the issues actually is we use the wrong kind of epoxy. This is tabletop epoxy, so it's actually not deep pour epoxy. It still works, but you kind of have to play with it a little bit more. So with deep pour epoxy, it's a lot thinner, and the air bubbles can escape a lot easier. Problem with deep pour, especially if you want to do a clear deep pour, is you have to be very cautious of how you're getting the air bubbles out. You have to do it multiple times, so you have to kind of let some rise, give it a sec, and then let some rise, and then, be applying heat or anything like that. But you can't apply too much heat, which is an issue I ran into multiple times before realizing my mistakes, where if you apply too much heat, something happens where maybe it's air releasing from the wood or some wrong thing, but then a ton of air bubbles pop up. So I was making coasters for my mom, and I was doing a epoxy layer, and it was like 6 coasters. 5 of them went pretty well. This was before I was good at epoxy. 5 of them went pretty well, and then one of them was getting that like excess air bubbles from the heat. So I was like, this is a gift. Like, it can't look bad. So I like scraped the epoxy off of it, and it works pretty well. I was able to get it off. It wasn't hardened. And then, can you pass me that nightmare that's under the stencil?
Oh, yeah. We have a nice little attraction here.
Yeah. So then I was working on this, which was going to be a table, which it's, I don't know if you can really see beyond the mess, but it's 2 different wood grains fit together with kind of like an abstracted whatever. But anyway, I created a 3D relief and then added a border. And the idea was this would be a flat table, and I would flatten it off with clear epoxy. But much like the coaster and other projects that I've had, I applied too much heat in one section, and air bubbles started coming up. So I was like, oh, I know what to do in this situation. I just have to get the epoxy out of here, and then I can fill it back up. But I think it was a combination of the amount of epoxy plus the amount of time that it had cured, where not only did that not work at all, but it was also like searingly hot. And I was wearing a latex glove, but I just had this like wad. I couldn't open my hand, and I just had like this wad of burning hot epoxy, and I was like trying to shake it off. Anyway, it was annoying. So know what kind of epoxy you're getting. That's my tip, I think.
Okay.
Because we're still talking about tips.
What was the end result of this?
The end result is this is now scrap wood, and I did the cut again and just changed. I didn't do an epoxy layer because with that 3D relief, it's still flat enough. Like, you could still place a glass on it or a plate on it, and it would work. So I just kept it, natural.
Okay.
Yeah, you could go with that monstrosity, which is the 3D Knight.
Yeah. So this next one, whose
that was
mistake
mine.
Was
that was especially my mistake.
What
So,
was the?
I would say as far as the Knight, you would notice that right here, the base height, I didn't even adjust for that originally. So when I was doing it, I was just mostly doing the height of the 3D model. And I didn't count for the base height, so that's what you could see on the background. It came off. Another thing I would say as well is that I didn't take into consideration as well with the hold down method. I wanted to go with double-sided tape, which is good. But if you're going aggressive, especially with the feeds, what I was doing with, I would say, the end mill, the project started to move. And so that's why you can see over here, it just shaved off.
Yeah.
Right. So I destroyed the Knight.
Destroyed the Knight.
Yeah, and so I learned my lesson, especially with double-sided tape. Especially if you want to go aggressive, I would recommend just using hold-down clamps.
Okay.
Or just lowering down the feeds. And, yeah, I would say, as for the height as well, I went with a smaller material. I didn't take that into consideration, too, since it was around an inch, I would say, the 3D model.
Okay.
But I went with a wood that is almost like 0.25. Like 1.125. So it wasn't that much of a clearance. I should just took that into consideration.
So 1 1/4 inch.
Yeah, especially yeah.
All right. So there's another example of things to consider before starting your projects. And then even though like the machine's capable of machining fast, you shouldn't always just max out the feeds and the RPM, because you're gonna end up with situations like this, or if you're hold down, you just overlook it. Very important. Double-sided tape is great, but it also melts too, especially when you're using it with let's say you're cutting aluminum. It has a tendency to heat up, get stuck to the bit, and then it will shift on you. And especially when you're cutting aluminum, it's not as forgiving as wood. So
be careful when you're starting your designs, and material hold down is probably the most important number one step. And then also checking your clamps positioning.
I would go so far as to say I'm anti double-sided tape.
That's me too.
Like at this point, I have no
I'd rather use
patience
hold
for
down
double-sided
clamp.
tape. I like using it as a precaution, but going like just double,
Yeah.
I do not trust it anymore. That used to be my go-to. I used to love it.
Yeah.
But there's one that Alibaba tape is great. I love that double-sided tape. But like I don't know, just the mess that it makes, and like all the anxiety around like whether it'll hold down. Like just use clamps and tabs. Like works way better.
Yeah.
Way better.
Or
And then
you-
clean it up
yeah.
with a straight edge.
Or you can make a fixture, right? And
Yeah.
pocket, hold down the material there.
Yeah.
Speaking of aluminum,
Oh yeah, we got another one.
here's aluminum cut. This was Pat's. This is the it looks like a B24.
Yeah, luckily this one wasn't as much of a nightmare as it could have been. This one, the reason I wanted to show this is just feeds and speeds consideration. Or actually, no, it's more past depth, I think. Because what this was, it was carved into aluminum. I used a O-flute aluminum 1/4-inch end mill to get most of it out of here. But then I went back in with a just regular V-bit, which you can get away with
Yeah.
using.
Not the best.
Yeah, not the best, but I needed all these little parts because, you know, like you got the tiny little spindle head there, and
Yeah.
a 1/4-inch or an 1/8 inch just wasn't doing it, and we didn't have a 16th inch on hand. So anyway, I went back in and then was able to do the machine fine, but then ideally it would have said made in New York underneath, and we would have used this as something to spray paint our shipping boxes before sending them out to all you lovely people. But with the pass step being too aggressive, and it was probably also the feed being a little bit too fast, it got to the K to start working backwards, and it maybe got like pass and a half, not even in, and it just moved the entire material because, well, ironically, I wasn't using double-sided tape. That could have helped if I had used double-sided tape and clamps, but I was just using clamps, and I probably didn't check that they were held down tight enough. So something to look out for. Maybe don't even do it. Maybe don't even use just a V-bit on aluminum, but if you want those really small things, you can figure it out. We won't condone it. Liability issues.
Definitely don't use a V-bit for that, unless if you have a extra side. So like flutes, if we're talking about the flutes, that one most likely used a single flute, right?
The V-bit?
V-bit was
No,
that
it was a
60
three flute.
3 flute.
It was
Okay.
that full 1/4-inch shank.
Okay. They have specific ones you can use that are made for cutting aluminum, and I'm not sure which one you used.
It
but
probably was.
Probably was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely.
The last sample we have. So we've got this.
Man, that monstrosity.
This one. The cut was actually very clean. However, we forgot to. I don't know, what did we forget to do? We were just bad with painting it. This was a spray painted finish, and at the very beginning we put a aura mask on it. Had a very nice raw cut, but as you can tell with spray paint, if you spray a lot into the corners and the tape is not 100% sealed, it's gonna bleed. So we left it overnight, and all the paint just bled into each other. So that made for a very horrible finish. So this just becomes a very big paperweight.
We really got to start priming, I realized.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah.
I realized that in the 6/8
So-
thing. It was like, don't forget to prime.
Yeah.
I was like, oh
yeah.
god.
And we on this one we finished a lot better because we actually took our time on it, and we used this one was spray paint too, right?
Yeah, they're both spray paints.
Yeah, we spray painted it.
I'll say the only difference
So-
is that we didn't really use the oral mask for that one.
Right. Yeah, you just did masking tape around the red
Yeah.
triangle, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So things to consider when you're finishing your project. Don't waste all that time and work when you are designing it and you get a very perfect cut just to spoil it with a bad paint job.
I'll also say as well with that one, it was because of the bits for the V-bit was especially dull.
Oh yes, you did use a dull bit on that first one, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so there was also that is true. There was a lot of tear out on that one, so the tape got ripped up, and we still tried to make it work, and it didn't. Yeah, so that's all the projects we have that we were gonna cover today. Hopefully that helped you, and
Share yours with us too. If you guys have
Yeah.
any triumphs or blunders, we'd
Yeah.
love to see them.
even if you have some cool marquee signs that you made, some cool epoxy projects that you made, whatever it is, tag us. We'll post it for you and share your work. Let's see if there's any other comments that we might have missed before we get out of here today. Do you guys have a location with sample files to cut? Website
Location?
link. What do you mean by location? Oh, hi, you're of Claude. Thanks for being here. She said that one looks really good. All right, appreciate it.
Which one?
Which one? She might have meant the Rangers one. PC Works. Not sure what location or sample file you're talking about, but if you want files, if any of you guys want files, just email us and we'll send them your way, and you can try test cut them too.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and wrap up today's. Someone just joined, but thanks for joining.
Thank you for
Hey.
joining.
Thanks for joining, but we're about to log off for the day. Thank you all. We'll be here again next Thursday. See you then.
Take care.
Thanks for joining, everyone. Bye.